Welcome to the 19th Century Charitable Association in Oak Park, which is where it is our vision to be a dynamic cultural center for community learning. I'm Judy Eckberg, Chair of the Social Science Committee. Our program committees have scheduled 31 programs during this calendar year, or this year from October through May. In this season of our enrichment series, which is part of our mission to strengthen our communities through learning, giving, and sharing our landmark building. Our presenter today, Ken Trainor, grew up in Oak Park. His formative years, 1952 to 1970, were among the most formative years in Oak Park history. Not because of him, of course. He left for 20 years to see what the rest of the world was about, then returned and landed a job with a local newspaper, the Wednesday Journal. He has been writing about his hometown for the past 34 years, proving that you can go home again. He is an award-winning columnist, thanks to the Illinois Press Association. And this is his third book that he will be talking about today. The first two were We Dare to Say, An Adventure in Journaling, 2007 ACTA Publications, and Unfinished Pentecost, Vatican II and the Altered Lives of Those Who Witnessed It, which is available on Amazon. He has one son and 3 grandchildren, whom he loves dearly and writes about frequently. I want to welcome Ken Trainor.
Thank you for inviting me to speak here today. And by way of introduction, or second introduction, I guess, I thought I would, through the miracle of rear projection, which I didn't even know existed, I want to show a short video that Joe Kreml from the Village put together about me and my book. Ken Trainor, a longtime staff member at Wednesday Journal, started in November of 1990. You get to know a town after 33 years. Yeah, I've never run out of things to write about. It's inexhaustible. And it's partly because the town keeps changing. It's not the same town it was 30 years ago. It wasn't even the same town it was yesterday. I decided to write a book about Oak Park for some years, and then must have been when I turned 70. I woke up one day and I had to write it. I felt I had really kind of written a book over the space of 30 years, one column at a time, one article at a time. I wanted to see what it would happen when I condensed all of that. It's not a history book, but there is a lot of history in it. It also helps to explain why we are who we are. Oak Park is different from most communities because we raise the bar really high, and we still have to raise it higher. Part of what I did in the book was to find the community so that people could see what it looks like when people are interacting, not just living next to each other. And I kind of developed an eye for seeing community as it was taking place. It's a positive book. A lot of times we lose track of how special we are, how far we've traveled, because we have so far to go. It's really important to be able to feel good about who we are. If you can celebrate your community, if you can recognize how special it is, you will have more inspiration and more energy to go the distance. I like to say that our past is inspirational, our future is aspirational, and our present is congregational. You can see how out of date it is because the book table was referenced, and we're all still in mourning about that. But we have Rebecca Lewis from the Pile bookstore in Berwyn, who is happy to sell books. She's probably in here somewhere, but she will be downstairs afterwards, so that in case you want to buy any. Not putting any pressure on anybody. So I like what Joe Kreml did. He kind of summed it up pretty well after spending an hour or so interviewing me and filming me in a number of places, including Austin Gardens, which is right out here. And he's been doing quality video for years for the village. And today we also have John Roberts and Ed Pitts, who are also doing a lot of quality video. And they're doing the live streaming. So I appreciate that. John and Ed have been, I've been on camera with them quite a bit lately, because for the last few months, Frank Lipo, the Historical Society Executive Director, and I have been meeting at different parks in Oak Park and talking about the village. We talk about the past, present, and future, and they film it, and we just go off. You know, he has to cut us off after an hour because we would just go on all day. And Frank mostly, because he knows more than I do, but I can fill in certain places. Anyway, if it turns out to be watchable, we'll let people know. I have no idea what it looks like. We're just talking and having a great time. But we tried to come up with a name for the series, if it ever turns into a series. And we were talking about how full Oak Park is and how rich in its history and culture. And John Roberts was the one who came up with, how about Oak Park is full of it? which we had to admit was true, but true in two senses. And what I'm here today to talk about is how Oak Park is full of it in the best possible sense. And although Joe did a great job of basically distilling what this talk is about, you're about to get the long version. Brace yourself. So, anyway. I published Our Town Oak Park last year. The cover art is part of a poster that Mitchell Markovitz did about 25 years ago. It's actually, the whole poster is in the first few pages. We reproduced it just so people could see, but we took 1/4 of it and blew it up. But it shows Elizabeth Court, which is just a block from here north, and it's the only, as far as I know, curving street in Oak Park, and one of my favorite streets. And that house is, I think, number 5. They have single-digit addresses on that street, which is kind of cool. But anyway, it also got across the idea of walking, which I do a lot in Oak Park. So let's see. I can tell you a few more things about the book. Why did I call it Our Town, Oak Park? Because I think Thornton Wilder's Our Town is the great American play. And I think of Oak Park as our town for the 21st century. Wilder wrote that his goal was to find a value above all price for the smallest details in daily life. And that was my goal for this book as well. Wilder's play may have more literary value than my humble book. After all, Our Town has been translated into 80 languages and continues to be produced. The latest version taking place on Broadway this year. So that's something that would be on my bucket list. But my book has one distinct advantage over Grover's Corners, New Hampshire, the town featured in the play, Oak Park is real, as are its residents. The cover also raises the question, what is true community, which this book claims to have found? So let's start with a description that leads to a definition. I describe Oak Park as a welcoming, diverse, inclusive, eco-friendly, equity-aspiring, ever-evolving community. Located at the intersection of independence and interdependence, continuity and change. It is the tension between those dichotomies that make us who we are. A community is more than living next to one another. It is about deliberately interacting, which leads inevitably to interconnection. Community is a classic example of the whole being greater than the sum of its parts. We are its parts. A strong sense of community is our immunity against the fear and polarizing divisiveness that is currently our national disease. Community, you could say, is Oak Park's superpower. We're not talking about the cliched Hallmark greeting card version of community. Not about marketing. This is not boosterism. It has to be true. Where interaction leads to interconnection, which leads to interdependence. True community, then, is the alchemy that takes place when residents intentionally become interwoven. When we become so much more than the sum of our me's. How did I locate true community? And why am I qualified to write about it? As you heard in the intro, I was born here in 1952, the same year that the VMA came into existence. I take no credit for it. A month after my parents moved to Oak Park from Cicero, I lived at 720 Lyman, if you know where that is. Just south of Jackson Boulevard, just west of Austin Boulevard. Ascension Parish. Well, technically St. Catherine of Siena Parish. But Ascension had just built a brand new gym, and I was the third of eventually 6 boys. Oh, your poor mother. Except she's the one who wanted the boys. My dad wanted a girl, which is why we had 6 boys. So my dad said, I think we'll go to Ascension. I grew up in Oak Park, then I left. That's important. You need a basis of comparison, I think, to really understand where you came from. After 20 years, I returned. That's important too, because you can go home again. Which was the title, actually, of the first talk that I gave here at the 19th Century Club a little over 30 years ago. It was just after I started working for the hometown newspaper Wednesday Journal. The other local paper gave up its ghost long ago. Over the past 34 years, my beat has been documenting community. I got paid to pay attention on long walks around the village. It's a pretty good beat. I did a lot of other things too while I was there, but that's the thing that stands out for me. Along the way, I became a convert, a devout communitarian. I'm not a Unitarian, I'm a communitarian. I found community wherever I looked. Our macro community does not just consist of individuals alone. It consists of micro communities. Right here, for instance. the 19th Century Women's Club, which became the 19th Century Club, which became the 19th Century Charitable Association, is one of our essential micro-communities. I like to think of it, one of the best things about it is that it's now in its third century. You can't say that about too many other organizations. I like to think of it as the mini Minoso of community organizations. That's a reference that only White Sox fans probably get, and there aren't too many White Sox fans left. So, in particular, this Monday enrichment program is a grand tradition. It's a great micro community. There are many wonderful micro communities in Oak Park, including Ascension, where I grew up, and St. Kate's, as people still call it. But we don't often come together as a macro community. The July 4th parade, a day in our village, to some degree. At the moment, however, we are a unified macro community for all the wrong reasons. We're bound in mourning for Detective Alan Reddens, the first Oak Park police officer to die in the line of duty since 1938. It's not a great way to be brought together, but we are closely knit right now, thanks to one good public servant. I wish I had known him. Some people ask, how long did it take to write this book? When readers ask how long it takes me to write a particular column, I sometimes say about 34 years. But in this case, the answer is about 72 years. And it's true, which is why I had to write it. 15 chapters, 92 revised and revitalized former columns, 344 pages, and before you react, I had to cut out 100 pages to avoid turning this into a doorstop. Anyway, my job at Wednesday Journal turned me into a community watcher, and I began to find true community everywhere I looked, in our people, places, and things. So I'd like to read a couple of examples so you have a taste of what the book is like. The first one is titled Mildred McDonald's Secret to a Long Life, from 1995 and updated in 2016. You can find it in the chapter Ceremonies and Celebrations. I chose it because it took place at this time of year and might help you get into the holiday spirit. Not many people live to 103, but Mildred McDonald did. When she died last week, that was 2016, I wondered anew, what is the secret to a long life? And that took me back to December 1995 and a long-standing Christmas tradition. Mildred McDonald's house always exudes warmth, but on this first Saturday in December, it is particularly warm inside. That's because today is Cookie Day. Has been every year since 1965, and the oven has been working overtime since 10 a.m. This 30th anniversary of the McDonald Family Cookie Fest draws a particularly good turnout, with more than 20 people present, mostly women and children from 3 years old on up, busily churning out batch after batch of sweet treats. Efficiency and productivity, of course, are not the primary goals. That would be family togetherness. And judging by the energy level and general good cheer, it is a success. The McDonald family has expanded to include in-laws and friends caught up in the thrill of the bake over the years who are now regulars. The Willards came all the way from Kankakee. Most of the husbands have been excused until dinner and drinks at 6 p.m. following this doughy marathon. The few on hand take refuge watching football in the living room, which doubles as a storage station for completed cookie batches. In tins on trays spread across the mantel, bookshelves, and sundry other flat surfaces. The kitchen and dining room, meanwhile, are a hotbed of frenzied activity. There isn't nearly enough room in the kitchen for the kind of production going on here, but it goes on anyway. This house would make the Keebler elves jealous. The McDonald elves are busy decorating gingerbread in the dining room on a round table covered by newsprint, which in turn is covered with the carcasses of used cake mate tubes and every manner of sprinkle and confectionery adornment imaginable. The kids are having a ball decorating myriad reindeer, Christmas trees, stars, etc. The rule is you take home whatever you decorate, and each elf has an aluminum tray with his or her name taped to it. Mildred is the dervish in the middle of this mayhem, introducing me to everyone and even putting me on the phone to say hello to her granddaughter, Kelly, who has called from college, where she's a freshman. This is the first cookie day in her lifetime where she hasn't been present. It's funny, she says, but I really miss it. Cookie Day has evolved over the years. Back in 1965, Mildred's oldest daughter, Sue Vanek, complained to her mom that with a new child and little room in her apartment kitchen, she couldn't bake Christmas cookies that year. Mildred invited her over, and a tradition was forged. As each of Mildred's 5 children had kids, the assembly line grew, as did the cookie varieties. The family repertoire now numbers 15 recipes. More are added, but only if they garner rave reviews. Lemon snowballs look to be this year's hit. Mildred provides the dough and decorations. Young Carrie, who prefers baking gingerbread to decorating it, gives a detailed demonstration of how to roll it out and make handprints. We like to eat the dough as we go along, he confides. In the cramped kitchen, young adults sit around the narrow counter, greasing cookie sheets with Crisco, then rolling balls of dough for the latest batch. They finish the difficult yet very popular Spritz butter cookies, then move on to the thimble cookies, thumbprints filled with preserves or gumdrops. The chatter and banter roll on as relentlessly as the dough. Can somebody put on Christmas tunes? Is this the right size? Grandma, want to hear my joke? Colleen hands me a lovely gingerbread reindeer with my name on it, decorated with sprinkles. They get pretty creative with designs, culminating in last year's Madonna cookie, invented by Maureen Berry, using the caps of gel tubes for the entertainer's famous brassiere. We don't have any fun, Mildred deadpans. I have to twist their arms to come. Mildred's niece, Marilyn, excuses herself as she rushes by. It's kind of like Bedlam, she explains. Kind of. Mother's really the focal point, says Sue. She's a grand lady in the old sense of the word. She knows how to do things and does them right. And this house, she adds, has been a focal point since we moved here in 1950. On my way out, Mildred stops dancing in the vestibule with Sue and little Michael long enough to hand me a large tin of cookies and an invitation to come back next year. I never did go back, but over the years I thought about Mildred and her family every time I went past the family homestead at the corner of Scoville and Van Buren. How do you get to be 103? There are probably lots of reasons, but one is by living your way to it. And Mildred McDonald knew how to live. Actually, I got a really nice update just yesterday when I was at Unity Temple, and Colleen McDonald Pierce, who's the youngest daughter of Mildred, sent along a message through Sean O'Shea, letting me know that the tradition is still going on. They had just had it the day before, and that would make the 59th consecutive year if they have done it every year. So what are the community elements in this piece? Big houses filled with families, hosting intergenerational gatherings, houses that come alive in the living. I love walking past these houses at night in Oak Park, especially under a full moon. I call it the long walk to forever. Or as I put it in another piece in the book, The Far Side of Day, which I dedicated to my late mom, this moon, keeping watch, keeping company on my walk through the village, past the lit windows of the living, down this long sidewalk to the bedroom where I sleep, not quite alone, thanks to this moon. Out my window, 3 days' journey hence, yet so close to the eye. Who could feel alone walking wordlessly on the far side of day, with this rear-view mirror moon wiped clean by tissue-thin clouds, pretending its preoccupation with earth and sun, keeping me company through this village of many seasons, this moon that holds so much and so many, all vital, some only in memory, somehow now contained in this moon of many dear faces, beaming back to this heart of many dear loves. Past the lit windows of the living, like the ones on the cover of my book. Although when I showed it to my grandsons, one of them says, "Why is that house on fire?" Which I had a hard time explaining. It does look that way. I just told him it was the light of human kindness. I love the warmth of our houses and multifamily buildings lit at night. That's another important element of true community. Let's move on to places. Across the street from us right now, hemmed in by buildings, is Austin Gardens, also known as the 19th Century Club's front lawn. It is one of my favorite spaces in Oak Park because it functions like a sanctuary. Here's my piece from the settings chapter titled, "The Art of Doing Nothing." Austin Gardens is many things, but that might not be your first impression. The forested section happens to be a fragile preserve, filled with wildflowers, lovingly planted some 50 years ago by 3 community activists, Elizabeth Walsh, Charlotte Peterson, and Julia Spears, who may have been members of the 19th Century Club, come to think of it. They carted jugs of water in baby carriages to keep the flowers nourished early on. Recently, I joined a wildflower tour in that portion of the park, led by Charlie Reedabush. Reedabush is a good name for a gardening guru. A volunteer group calling themselves Save Austin Gardens for Everyone, SAGE, did considerable work last fall, clearing saplings, brush, and invasive plants that crowded out the wildflowers each spring. This year revealed the wonderful results. Wildflowers are small, and unless you pay attention, and know what you're looking for, you'll miss the trout lilies, Dutchman's breeches, toothwort, spring beauty, Solomon's seal, and May apples. Even the more visible Virginia bluebells, wild phlox, and wild geraniums seem to escape the attention of dog walkers who let their beloved canines poop and pee, then tear up strands of red trillium with the useless instinctive scraping of their back paws. My apologies to dog owners. There are only certain ones, a very small percentage that do this. The park was originally the homestead of Henry Warren Austin Sr., closer of the village's last saloon, well before Prohibition, and developer of the Austin neighborhood in Chicago. His son, Henry Jr., founded Oak Park Trust and Savings, our first bank. It's now Chase Bank at Marion and Marion and Lake. He and his wife, Edna, bequeathed what is now Austin Gardens to the Park District in 1947 with an endowment and the stipulation that the property be kept in a natural state. The Historical Society of Oak Park River Forest recently put a marker on an old photo of the Austin home near the newly constructed Environmental Center in the park. Entering Austin Gardens last week, I passed a couple of kids, sister and brother probably, maybe 10 and 7 years old respectively. The boy carried a kite. The girl asked 2 questions without pausing. Why are you wearing those pants? Why do people come to this park to do nothing? I admire well-phrased questions. She didn't ask, how come people don't do anything in this park? That would imply inertly wasting time. If most visitors are like me, they come to Austin Gardens specifically to do nothing. Likely because most of us are doing too much before we get here and after we leave. Austin Gardens is a park where the pastoral supersedes, but doesn't preclude the recreational. There just aren't enough places to do nothing these days, which is why many of us end up here. Nothing, of course, is a relative and misleading term. A lot goes on in Austin Gardens while people are doing nothing. Some are busily putting their day or even their lives in order or perspective. Some are remembering people, places, and things that won't let them go. Some feed the squirrels, pigeons, and sparrows. Some feed themselves, eating lunch in a serene setting that soothes the soul even as they satisfy the stomach. For some, the afternoon's productivity, their required something, hinges largely on doing this nothing. Teens hang out after school, a fidgety, frequently hyperactive form of doing nothing. Lovers touch, talk, and nestle on benches. Squirrels chase each other up and down trees or search for long-lost food stashes. I always wondered why squirrels always looked like they had something to hide. In the center of the open meadow, a bare patch indicates where poor but skilled players strut and fret their hours upon the stage erected here every summer for Festival Theater's outdoor performances of Shakespeare. Plaques set in the ground by various trees mark the place where loved ones spend precious moments doing nothing other than paying respects to a dear departed relative or friend. Bodies sprawl on blankets soaking up sunshine. Dogs lead their leashed owners around the paved circle path or chase the aforementioned squirrels when allowed to. I watch for migrating birds, take inventory of the wildflowers, think and sometimes fret about all the people I love, and carry on imaginary dialogues with some of them, scribble in a back pocket notebook, surface thoughts I want to remember, run through the ongoing to-do list and the more extensive wish I could do list, imagine more interesting lives I could lead, and take note of how interesting my current life is. Look forward to whatever I have to look forward to, and remember things worth remembering. And at times, try very hard not to think about any of this, but simply let my senses pull me out of my head and into the world to pay attention to how much more than nothing is happening every moment. I don't know if that answer would satisfy the impatient little girl's question, and I haven't a clue why her little brother was wearing those pants. The next day, I spotted their kite dangling in the branches of a tree in the center of the park. So now they know at least one of the reasons people do nothing in Austin Gardens. Austin Gardens is probably my favorite place in Oak Park. I ended up I was weeding through all the previous columns I had written about it and settled just on one. Actually, it was two that I put together. But it's a different kind of community, a lot looser than the McDonald's family home. You usually come alone or with a friend, and other people come in, and the community forms, unforms, and reforms if you're there long enough to see it, which sometimes I am. But it is a community nonetheless, especially it was during the pandemic, which was kind of a boon to community, strangely enough. Everybody was out walking the sidewalks, and then in the parks they were really being used, which was kind of nice to see. Again, not the greatest reason, but that's where you find community, out and about. Anytime there are three dog owners and their dogs gathered together in a park, you've got a micro-community going. So who's this book for? I made a list. People who grew up here and left, but still remember or need to remember. People who didn't grow up here, recently landed here, and want to know what they're getting into. High school and college grads who find themselves missing their town of origin. That was me once upon a time, and I ended up back here. So, people relocating to the Chicago area who are shopping for a community with character. People who have lived here many years, but still don't really know the place. People who live elsewhere and find their own community is missing something that they can't quite put their finger on. People who live elsewhere and want to stay there, but want ideas on how their town can build a stronger sense of community. People who live here and want Oak Park to be an even better community than it already is. Those are important people. People who don't realize that a book about one mid-size, Midwestern, middle-class town in the beginning of the 21st century, which was once described as the middle-class capital of the world. True. Not to mention the world's largest village. No longer true. Can have universal appeal and application. People who realize that you can become a better town by building a stronger sense of community and want to learn how to do it. In other words, pretty much everyone. I want you to read this book because if you don't already, I want you to feel good about living here. I mean, really good. No boosterism, the real thing. I want you to fall in love with it, or fall in love with it again. as I did. This book is my small contribution to building a stronger community, because right now we are an island of light in a sea of darkness. We can't defend our island of light by hiding it or building walls. We can only resist the darkness by being brighter than we already are. A shining example of true community. This book is a celebration of interconnected community. Mac Robinet, one of the first African Americans who, with his family, tasted our imperfect but still genuine welcome back in the 1960s, said about this book on the back cover, "Our town, Oak Park, is about us, for us." This collection of short essays is like finding love letters at the bottom of a sock drawer. He's right. This is 92 love letters to the town I grew up in and that I'm proud to say I live in today. It is shamelessly upbeat, because celebrating who we have become will help us get to who we are becoming. How do we do that? By sustaining and growing community, true community. And where can we find true community? Everywhere. But if you're having trouble finding it, read this book. And when you're finished, give it to your kids and grandkids to read. Because Oak Park has an important story to tell about showing grace under pressure, finding the courage to become a more open, welcoming, and inclusive town filled with people of all backgrounds. We still have our wide lawns, but we stretched our minds and opened our arms. Oak Park's story is important because if it could happen here, it can happen anywhere. And for this country to survive, it needs to happen everywhere. Happily ever after is never guaranteed. We need to tell the story and keep telling it, because some people forget and some haven't heard it yet. And because the story is not finished. It's still being written, and you and I are writing it. The story is contained in our diversity, equity, and inclusion statement, which was first developed in 1973 and is still updated occasionally, most recently in 2019. Unfortunately, this one is too long and reads like the village's fine print, instead of a powerful village creed. Sorry if anybody here worked on it. So here is a condensed version whose origin dates back 60 years to 1964, when it appeared as a newspaper ad signed by over 1,000 Oak Park and River Forest residents, including my parents, which I didn't know for 30 years after this. They never said anything. The author was a community activist named June Heinrich. Anybody remember June Heinrich? That's too bad. She was wonderful. But anyway, now you know about her. And this was really the event that started us on the path to the Fair Housing Ordinance, which kind of solidified our fame. The title is simple, direct, and unpretentious. The right of all people to live where they choose. I used some of the language of later versions of the diversity statement in order to bring it up to date. We believe in the essential oneness of humankind and seek to foster such unity in our community by declaring that we want residents in our village to be open to anyone interested in sharing our benefits and responsibilities, regardless of race, color, creed, national origin, age, religion, sexual orientation, language, gender, economic class, mental, physical impairment, or disability, or any of the other characteristics that too often are used to divide us from one another. That we believe both our commonalities and our differences are assets. That we commit to breaking down the barriers of the systems of oppression that limit and divide us. That we reject bias toward any group of people because no group of people is superior and no group is inferior. That we affirm all people as members of the human family deserving of equal treatment. That we believe in equal opportunity for all in education and occupations, in harmony with constitutional guarantees of our rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That mutual understanding between people can best be attained by an attitude of reciprocal goodwill and increased interaction. That creating a mutually respectful, multicultural, equitable, and welcoming environment does not happen on its own. It must be intentional. That all citizens, in a spirit of justice, dignity, and mutual kindness, should embrace the challenge that still faces all Americans 248 years after the Declaration of Independence. Embracing diversity and achieving equality and inclusion for all, in word, thought, deed, and law. I'm a proponent of reading this aloud in a public forum, such as Day in Our Village, every year. We tell our story with words, but also by living it, by staying connected in whatever form that takes. You are staying connected by being here today. Thank you for everything and everything you continue to do to build a stronger community, to grow our island of light. Thank you.
Thank you for your wonderful stories, sharing your life and the life of our community. And we are now open for questions.
It relates to community and to Mrs. McDonald. In 1990, I opened my store, and a few weeks later, she walked in and bought these 3 very decorated wooden boxes for her daughters. And she told me she was taking the bus, and the boxes were bulky, so I told her I'd drop them at her house. She only lived a few blocks away, and I tell everybody that because I'm in Oak Park, and you are only a few blocks away. So some months later, my daughter was born. It became apparent that she was going to be ill. My husband had been laid off in the 1990 financial crisis. And the Wednesday Journal did an article about us. 2 days later, Margaret McDonald walked into my store and wrote a check to me for $300 to help cover her medical expenses. People in infant welfare that I was part of had fundraisers for us, raised money to have her have some nursing care during the night when our insurance ran off, and I've never felt so loved and protected in my whole life. It still brings tears to my eyes, how this community put its arms around me and my family. So I just want to thank everyone, because possibly some of you also were donors, and I get to thank everyone. But that turned what was the worst of times into also being the best of times for me. Thank you.
You could have told that story right off the bat, and I wouldn't have had to go through this long explanation of what true community is about. That's true community.
Ken, thanks so much. And, we love the Wednesday Journal, your article's in it too. What's the future for the Wednesday Journal? We're all a little anxious about it.
Well, it's got a future, which is better than I think it had before it went nonprofit. So that's the good news. It's got a chance. And I wouldn't say we're on death's door or anything. It seems to me, I don't see panic in the hallways when I'm there. I'm only there 2 days a week because I'm semi-retired. But I think they're doing pretty well with the generous donations from people who value what it represents. And of course, we need to earn that. We really have to. And we have to be really good in order to keep people donating. So that's what I tell people at the Journal. I'd say it's not something that we can predict, how long we'll keep going. But, if there was one guy who's determined, it's Dan Haley. So that's a good thing. He's not the give up kind of guy. And I think people value this newspaper, especially now. Right now, and if there's one thing that can help, and I have to give Dan in particular credit. He started putting this label or this slogan up on the top of Wednesday Journal some years back, growing community, which eventually turned into the new name for our company, Growing Community Media, which has two meanings. It's like, when we're going to donors asking for money, we want them to grow community media. But for me and for the people who work there, we want to create media that grows community. And as long as we're doing that, we have the best chance of anybody like us to survive. And we're in the right place because there are people who recognize it and are generous. And thank you to anyone who has donated. And please keep donating.
I wanted to thank you so much for including a chapter on Mildred McDonald. I lived on the corner of Scoville and Van Buren for 28 years,
really?
right across the street from her.
Wow.
And
I know that house.
She came right over maybe 2 days after we moved in. I had a 20-month-old and a 5-year-old and a 6-year-old who were scared to death by our huge house compared to the little townhouse we had in the city. She gave my kids Christmas presents every year. But I want to tell you the Oak Park story. On her 100th birthday, so that would have been 2013, right? On her 100th birthday, she was pretty much housebound by then. She did live alone on that corner until the week before she died. She was a vital part of Ascension Parish, and the entire grammar school came out and paraded down the street.
The school is a block away.
As a block away. We live, this corner is kitty corner from Ascension School. The entire school comes out, parades down the street. Her son was in the fire department, so he had the street closed off. They circle her front porch. She comes out on the front porch, and the entire Ascension School sang her happy birthday. It was amazing. It was just amazing.
Yeah,
and
I think we have a picture of that in the paper.
In the paper. I'm sure it was covered by the Journal. It had to be. And that's who she was. She was, wow, and just a lady. And really a lesson in how to age. She stopped driving ages ago, and she had her regular taxi driver who she'd call up and she'd ask for that blue cab. And not driving was not a factor. She never stopped doing everything she used to do. So thank you for including her, and that sold the book. I have to give it to both my kids.
Well, and it brings up the whole thing about the constant reputation of journalists that they just want to be negative and sensational. And, Mildred McDonald is the perfect example of how you're not inflating anything with that story. I'm not inflating anything with that story. It's just that good a story. And unfortunately, not enough of journalism is done that way. because they either veer into that boosterism, which is empty and inflated, or they try to be hard-assed, and hard-edged. And they don't need to be. There's this area in between, and there are so many stories in Oak Park, alone, that are worth telling and are real.
Could you tell us, what do you do besides writing a column?
Oh.
I mean, with the Wednesday Journal. That's
Yeah, right. A lot of people think that's all I did, all those years, and I'm like, boy, if I could do that and make a living, that would be something. And I wore just about every hat in the place. But right now, I only work 2 days a week, but I still edit the viewpoint section, which in the era of misinformation is a much more difficult job than it used to be. You don't just put letters in anymore. You gotta sift through the people who are trying to work an agenda and twist the truth. But anyway, and then I edit the obituary pages, and then I edit a lot of copy. So I'm busy there 2 days a week, but I've done all kinds of editing jobs. I was the managing editor for a while. I wasn't particularly good at it, but I did it. Because, you had to fill in. It's that kind of organization. The organization that, where you have to reinvent the plane while you're flying it. That's Wednesday Journal.
I was wondering, could you say a bit more about what you do when you discover misinformation in the letters to the editor? Do you communicate with the letter writer, or what?
Yes, that's something we've been working out during the last couple of years. So right now, what we do is, we put out a general call. We said, our new guidelines are that if you're going to throw out a lot of statistics and numbers to make your point, you have to cite the sources of your information, either at the end or in the copy itself. But not everybody read that, and we don't put it in every week because it uses up too much of my valuable space in viewpoints, and I can't get all the letters in as it is. This is the only community, I'm sure, in the country that has a letters to the editor section that is as long as this one is. Our record was 17 pages one year. And anyway, so what happens is the new people who haven't seen it will send in a letter or one view, and they'll offend this new guideline, and then I have to get in touch with them and say, you need to put these citations in, and we can't publish it until you do, because we at least want the reader to see, and us, where you get it, because there's a lot of people playing fast and loose with the truth, as you know. It's more work, but it's fascinating in a sense.
I just wanted to say thank you so much for your wonderful talk, but also I am almost 7 years out of Oak Park. I still miss not being an Oak Park resident, and I get the journal because of the viewpoints section.
Oh. It's one of the best read sections in the paper, and not because of me, but because of people take ownership, and that's the way we survive, getting back to the second question, I think, is people have to have a sense of ownership. They have to take part, because we don't have the ability or the money to be able to do the job really properly, not as well as it should be done. So when people write in and take ownership of the paper and its pages, that's the way it should operate, I think, in the future. Not entirely, but an important part.
I just wanted to mention that my connection to the village goes back to 1926.
Wow.
When I moved to Oak Park in 1986 to teach at Oak Park River Forest High School, my father announced that he had moved here in 1926, wow. 60 years earlier, and he worked at a store that only the really old people will remember, Shaw and McAllister. It was kind of like a Weebolt's. It had many branches.
Ah, okay.
So he started out he lived in DeKalb, and he joined the store, worked in Berwyn, and then he worked in Oak Park.
Wow.
Then he was transferred to LaGrange, where he met my mother.
Oh, my gosh. Where was it located?
It was located on Marion. Wait, I'm not sure where that one was located, because then he worked at another store on Marion. That was Bailey's Western Wear.
Wow.
Bailey's Western Wear.
No, I haven't. Only Frank Lipo would know these two. Bob Treseman, you should know. I answered all your questions. That's so great.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
And thank you for coming.